Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. So, the Quebec government has said, go ahead and commit some murders. It's okay, it's fine, we're not going to prosecute you. Now, of course, they're only referring to certain specific kinds of murder, but let's talk about whether this is a good idea. Now, I'm initially referring to a news article, and we're also going to go through the actual legislation, but I'll link all of that in the description below. But here is from the National Post. They say, first reading, Quebec tells doctors to start ignoring federal homicide laws. And we'll just quote them here for a little bit here. They say, last year, the Quebec legislature adopted Bill 11, which aimed to allow physicians to administer MAID, which is medical assistance in dying, to unresponsive or mentally incompetent patients, provided the patient had given advance authorization to do so. This is considered murder under federal law, so Quebec announced this week it will simply be instructing prosecutors to ignore the relevant sections of the criminal code governing culpable homicide. In a Monday statement, the Federal Ministry of Health said they wouldn't be challenging the decision, but warned Canada's non-Quebec doctors not to get any ideas. As the criminal code applies uniformly across Canada and does not permit the provision of MAID based on an advance request, providing MAID pursuant to an advance request remains an offense under the criminal code. All right, there's more in the article, but you should check it out and read it. But I wanted to break down the law, and I wanted to talk about what all this is. So first of all, we can look at the criminal code, and it's got a whole section for medical assistance in dying. Why is this in here? Well, because the Canadian courts said, listen, this has to be in here. You've got to have some provisions for this because otherwise it is discriminatory towards people with serious health conditions that put them into serious pain. And this was the result of a whole bunch of court battles, but the court said essentially there's got to be these provisions in the law, and so these were put through. All right. Medical assistance in dying means A, the administering by a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner of a substance to a person at their request that causes their death, or the prescribing or providing by a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner of a substance to a person at their request so that they may self-administer the substance and in doing so cause their own death. Now, when they say the administering by a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner, that's a limit. It's got to be a medical professional. You can't do this yourself unless you're a doctor. And of a substance to a person, it's very clear that they're contemplating some sort of lethal drug and that they're not considering that this substance might, for instance, be baseball bat or kitchen knife or, ouchie stick or bullet to the face. So they have a very specific idea of how this is going to take place. And it can either be that they inject it into you or that they give you something that you can then take on your own time. Now, there'll at some point be a case of somebody who gets that stuff and decides, you know what? Sure, I've been prescribed this to take it at, but I'll just slip it into a family member's drink or something. We'll see. Anyway, that's beside the point. I'm going on a little rabbit hole tangent, but eligibility for medical assistance in dying. These are eligibility criteria. You may receive medical assistance in dying only if you meet all of the following criteria. So first, you're eligible for health services funded by a government in Canada or would be eligible except for a waiting period. What is this designed to stop? This is designed to prevent tourists from getting this, or for people coming to Canada for the specific purpose of taking advantage of this. That's what that provision is about. B, at least 18 years of age and capable of making decisions with respect to their health. C, they have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. So it's got to be serious and it's got to be something that isn't going to get better. You can't use this for, like, I have a cold. Even if your cold really sucks, so long as you're going to get better, yeah. D, they have made a voluntary request for medical assistance in dying that, in particular, was not made as a result of external pressure. I'm not sure how they can determine that. And E, they give informed consent to receive medical assistance in dying after having been informed of the means that are available to relieve their suffering, including palliative care. So you have to say, hey, here's your other options. Now, I'm just going to stop here and just note, I am not going to get into the morality of this or whether or not this is a good idea, because I think those are decisions that you can make on your own. You don't need to tell me, you don't need me to tell you what you should think about this. I'm just telling you what the law is, as opposed to, what they ought to do here, because this is a really difficult question that's going to be informed by your personal beliefs and so forth. Suffice to say, this is seriously controversial. And one of the issues of controversy is whether or not medical assistance in dying is being overprescribed or is being offered to people who maybe should be offered other things, because there have been reports that people have gone in saying, hey, I'm not getting enough disability support. I need some additional support so that I can go on, functioning. I just need some help with, stairs or that kind of thing. And there have been reports that government officials have said, oh, cool, have you considered dying instead? And that, I think everybody agrees, is not cool, but there's questions as to how much of that is going on. All right, carrying on. There's a definition for grievous and irremediable medical condition. We're going to skip over that. And there's some safeguards. And one of the critical safeguards that we're going to talk about here is under Section H. It says, immediately before providing the medical assistance in dying, give the opportunity to withdraw the request and ensure that the person gives express consent to receive medical assistance in dying. So let's say you go in and they say, okay, you're eligible for medical assistance in dying. We've got a doctor here who's willing to kill you. On the day of, they have to say, do you still want to die? Is that still on your plans for today? And if you say, nah, I'm not interested, then they have to go, okay, cool, we're leaving. So this is a provision, but it runs into some trouble. And one of the issues is, what happens if you have a degenerative condition and you want to sign yourself up for medical assistance in dying, but you're worried that on the day of, you might have degenerated enough that you just can't do anything about it. One of the concerns here is that there were people who were specifically saying, listen, I have a degenerative condition, and right now life is good. Life is okay. But at some point, life is going to be intolerable, and I wouldn't like to have this available at that point, but I don't want to do it now. And I'm worried that if I wait until then, that I am not going to be able to have access to it. So there is a waiver provision for an advance waiver in the law. And we'll talk about this. This is in the actual criminal code. And then we're going to go and look at Quebec's law and how it changes, or and how it's different. So, final consent waiver. For the purposes of subsection 3, that's the safeguards provision, the medical practitioner or nurse practitioner may administer a substance to a person to cause their death without meeting the requirement set out in paragraph 3H. That's the one we just went over, right? That consent on the day of. If A, before the person loses the capacity to consent to receiving medical assistance in dying, they met all the criteria, they entered into an arrangement in writing with the medical practitioner or nurse practitioner that the medical practitioner or nurse practitioner would administer a substance to cause their death on a specified day. This is critical. On a specified day. So you got to say June 30th, 2026 or something like that. It's got to be specific. They were informed by the medical practitioner or nurse practitioner of the risk of losing the capacity to consent to receiving medical assistance in dying prior to the day specified in the arrangement. So the doctor has to have said, what if, right? That has to have been specifically contemplated. And in the written arrangement, they consented to the administration by the doctor of a substance to cause their death on or before the day specified in the arrangement if they lost their capacity to consent to receiving medical assistance in dying prior to that day. And they have to have actually lost the capacity. And then here's one that's going to result in litigation. This is going to be an issue. The person does not demonstrate by words, sounds, or gestures refusal to have the substance administered or resistance to its administration. And they note that involuntary words, sounds, or gestures made in response to contact do not constitute a demonstration of refusal or resistance. But if they do demonstrate by some sort of refusal, then medical assistance in dying can no longer be provided to them on the basis of that advance consent. Why do I say this is going to be a source of litigation? Well, let's say you go up and, the doctor has a syringe of some lethal chemical and they inject it in the person and the person slaps the doctor. Is that because they're slapping the doctor because it hurt to be stabbed with the syringe, or is that because they don't want to die? This is gonna be something that is a problem, and the issue is if it's that they don't want to die, then suddenly you're into murder. This is a law that is basically like walking on the edge of a cliff, because if you get it right, then you are legally protected. You've got a defense. But if you get it wrong, then you are on the other side of the cliff edge, and you are falling all the way down into the land of mandatory minimum sentence of life in prison. Murder, that being the intentional killing of another person without a valid defense, has a mandatory minimum sentence of life in prison, and the only difference is times of parole. Now, this would probably be first-degree murder because you don't really get much more planned and deliberate, which is the criteria for first-degree murder in Canada, than a whole, we set a date for this, and we had all of this like legal paperwork and so forth. And yeah, that has a very lengthy mandatory minimum in the sense of life, but no possibility of parole for a long, long time. Okay, so there's all those provisions and those exceptions and that advance waiver in the law. Well, what does Quebec want to allow? Quebec wants to allow certain other things. And one of the things that isn't allowed currently in Canadian law is basically an advance consent with an if-then provision. What I mean by that is to say, if I get to a certain state, then I want you to kill me. And it's interesting because Canadian law does actually allow for this in certain ways. You can say, if I get to a certain state, then I would like to have medical intervention cease. And so, for instance, they can take you off of life support because they can say, I don't want those machines keeping me alive. I no longer consent to that medical intervention to keep me alive. The problem is that if they take you off the machines and you just go on breathing, you go on being alive, then they can't do anything about that. They can disconnect the machines, but they can't go and inject you with something or hit you with a mallet or anything like that to cause you to die. So Quebec wants to solve that problem. And so how do they do it? Well, they have a couple of provisions. One of them here, this is in the Bill 11, notes that a patient making an advance request must be assisted by a competent professional, and with the assistance of the professional, the patient must describe in detail in the request the clinical manifestations related to their illness that, when the patient has become incapable of giving consent to care and a competent professional finds that they're exhibiting those manifestations, must be considered to be the expression of their consent to medical aid in dying being administered to them once all of the criteria set out in this act have been met. So what does that complicated legalese jumble stuff mean? Well, it means that you can say, I want to die when I reach a specific set of circumstances. So not the specific date that is allowed for in the criminal code, but just if things get as bad as this, then please kill me. Okay, so that's one provision that's in there. There's another provision here that is also different in Quebec, and this allows for the patient may designate in the advance request a trusted third person to whom they entrust the following responsibilities. And we're not going to go through all of this, but basically what this means is that if you are incapable of giving consent under the Quebec law, you would be able to have designated in advance a person who gets to make the decision as to when they should kill you. It's not allowed in the Canadian law, but in Quebec law, there is a provision for that. So similar to how you can have a person who's designated in advance to make decisions about like when they should take you off of life support, this is somebody who can be designated in advance to be like, okay, this is when you kill them. All right. So again, I'm not going to get into the morality of this because that's going to be your call. I'm just here to talk about the law of this. And the law of this is that this is murder. Canada has different levels of government. We've got the federal government, we've got the provincial governments, and we have municipal governments. And we have all sorts of pseudo-government and quasi-government and governmental bodies, but that's kind of its own thing. But for the purpose of this, we only really need to worry about the federal government and the provincial government. The federal government has the exclusive jurisdiction over the criminal law. They get to decide what is criminal and what is not. And so a province has no ability to carve holes in this. If the province passes a law that purports to cancel the federal government's ability to prosecute crimes in any particular sense, that's not valid. They don't have that power. The federal government gets priority in this. And so when the federal government says what is murder, Quebec doesn't actually have the power to say, well, these things are not murder. These things are okay. Now, the way they're getting around that is they are instructing provincial prosecutors. They're saying, listen, don't prosecute these specific kinds of murder. And the federal government has apparently said, okay, we're not gonna intercede. They could, but they're not going to. So what is the problem? If you're a doctor who wants to do this, or if you're somebody who's contemplating being a trusted third person, if you're one of those people, stop watching this video immediately and contact a lawyer who can give you specific legal advice, because I'm just talking in general. I'm not giving anybody specific legal advice, but this would be crazy. And what I mean by that is that the statute of limitations for murder is never. There is no limitation period for murder. If you kill somebody at age 18, they can still prosecute you for that if you manage to reach the ripe old age of 150. Sure, it might be like, yeah, we meant to prosecute you if we found you when you were young, but we can prosecute you at any time. And that includes if they decide not to go after you. They can change their mind at any time and say, yeah, now we're prosecuting you. So let's say the Quebec government has an election, and they do that from time to time because, they're a government. So the new government decides we don't like this bill. They could turn around and say, now we want to start prosecuting everybody involved. Or let's say the federal government, who's currently said, we're just going to stay out of this. Let's say they have an election, which will be happening in the next year. The new federal government might not be as keen on just sitting this one out and might decide to start prosecuting doctors for murder, which, is serious, for having acted in these ways. So if you are a doctor and you do this, you basically can never sleep soundly again because you could be charged at any point in the future with murder. So Quebec is really behaving irresponsibly here. And what I mean by that is that they're making a promise to doctors. They're making an encouragement to doctors saying, you can do this. And let's assume you think it's a good idea that they can do this. It's still crazy to tell somebody that it's okay, that they're going to be fine when they can't make that promise. What they should be saying is, if you do this, you're going to, like, don't pass a bill that basically invites doctors to get into a situation where they could go to jail forever. Even if you think this law is a good idea, you should not rely on it. Like, relying on this is crazy. And again, I'm not trying to give you legal advice. This is me talking. If you are in this situation, please call a lawyer, and after they stop screaming, they'll be able to tell you exactly what you should and shouldn't do here. I hate when governments do this, where they play this kind of game, because the whole point of this is that Quebec wants to flex their muscles a little bit on the federal government, because Quebec likes to do that. It is sort of the Quebecois national pastime, and to be fair, anybody who wants to fight with a government is kind of I'm already a little sympathetic. I mean, depends on their reasons, but I'm already a little sympathetic. But yeah, so Quebec is basically saying that the federal government is going to blink here, and they did, but they can't make that promise. And you'll also note that the federal government is like, yeah, anyone else, no, we'll come after you. This is really, really, this fight between Quebec. Quebec also wanted the federal government to put these provisions into the criminal code, and the federal government said, no, we're not doing that. So, yeah, this, ultimately, this battle that Quebec and the federal government are having has the potential to really, really hurt some doctors involved in this. And I don't like that. So let me know what you think. Again, I'm trying to steer clear of the whole, like, is this a good idea thing? Because that's your call. That's not really my decision to tell you. But legally speaking, this is crazy. And I think there's a very real possibility that we see some people go to jail forever. They may, or, they get parole in, 10 years, 20 years. Yeah. So, those are kind of my thoughts. This is bizarre, but, yeah. Let me know what you think. Let me know, this is kind of the government saying, do you feel lucky, punk? Okay. Yeah. I've had a bunch of people asking me about this one, so I thought I'd do a video. But again, linking the legislation and all of that in the description below, so you can check it out. You can check my homework. Say, Runkle, did you get this wrong? And yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Please like this video, share this with your friends, subscribe to see more content. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters. There's a link to that in the description below if you want to join them. At the $50 level, Bottle Shock and Oz, Canada's National Firearms Association, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, and the CCFR, as well as PJs Forever, CMP, Cielo, Purple Dragonair, and thank you so much. It's really appreciated. At the $20 level, we have Mark, Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Kyle Fox, Drunkle of the Baileys, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Marvin, and Dorky Dane. I'm also going to send all of my Patreon supporters, I think, a link to the calendar. I made a calendar for Extra Life support, but it occurs to me I should send it to the Patreon supporters as well, so I'll send that out. I think as well to the local supporters. There's a link to the locals as well if you want to support there instead. Some people don't like Patreon. So thank you for watching. Hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.